What's up? It's Matt. We're back with another restaurant expert roundup, this time from across the pond with author of a few books, including the one in my hand. John, what's going on?
Well, a lot. We're in the big process of reopening up over here. The UK splits very much into England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, and therefore that's kind of like 4 states, but they're all doing it separately, like, the way so many different states are in the US reopening. So it's quite a challenge, but look, we're moving through, let's just keep viewing it in a positive way.
So tell us a little about your background, and about a couple of books like this one in my hand here, Wake Up and Sell More Coffee.
Well, I spent approximately 15 years as an owner-operator of restaurants, fast food, cafes, coffee shops. I did quite a lot of retail as well. A big sandwich bar chain. So when I left university, came back to Northern Ireland, and this is Northern Ireland back in the days where, unfortunately, we used to shoot and bomb each other. It wasn't necessarily ideal in terms of setting up businesses, or just in terms of anything, really. So my friend and I couldn't really get a job, so we set up this sandwich bar, and it actually grew and grew and grew, and we did very well. And by the time I was 28, we had the biggest sandwich business in Ireland. So we had lots of shops, and then we had this food production facility, and we sort of thought we were pretty special. But, and you will know these stories, grew far too fast, made a lot of mistakes, and had a business partner who, let's just say, had an interesting perspective on the accounting side of things. And we ended up losing everything. So by the age of 29, it's all gone. We had to sell all the shops to pay off the debts that we accrued in the factory. And then I to cut a very long story short, opened other stuff, chip shops and all of those other things, in an effort to, what were the lessons that I learned during that growth? What then were the mistakes? And sort of let's focus on the mistakes, not just focus on what we did well. And I did about 15 years, and then sold up about 15 years ago.
Okay.
Employing 120 people. Then we had garden centers with very busy cafes as well, and sold up to become a consultant. Okay. And as much as anything else, I sort of see myself as a people person, but, employing lots of people is no fun here. It's no fun in the States. It's hard work. So I became a consultant. And then obviously, as you very well know, half of what we're trying to do is then make sure that people can think that what we are providing in terms of advice makes some sense before they might sort of spend some money. So I threw together, and threw together is a flippant way to put it, but I wrote that book. And what that is the way that I view it is, it was originally sort of 75 ideas. What I also discovered just before I wrote that was that 95% of business books are never read past the first chapter. And then I think you would also agree. Now, look, that's a statistic that I can't back up. I read it,
Yeah. You read it in the first chapter.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Do you know what? That's actually the truth. But I can remember thinking, right, okay, well, look, our industry involves people who are really, really busy, probably less likely than somebody sitting in a great big corporation to sit down and read, Jim Collins' Good to Great or whatever. Probably had to work harder than most to get people to read past the first chapter. So did a lot of research in terms of what makes people read books. And it's quite simple. You do short chapters, you do lots of story, you do lots of, you keep it light and really actionable. So that is, what are we at? About just over 100 pages, 50 tips, nearly all of them with an actual true story. Now, the way that I viewed that then was, I didn't really have a process, if that makes sense. I had a lot of experience, and I had already done some work with clients, but I didn't have a crystal clear process in my head for how to make cafes, restaurants, etc. more money. Yeah. And this was, if I'm honest, I always regard this a little bit as, this was me being being clever, if you know what I mean. Here are good stuff that I learned along the way. But if you really scratch the surface, and you've got a real problem over multiple people, was there a process that I could really apply? And the answer was no. So that book has been really, really successful over the years, still sells very well. Certainly in the UK, it's very much regarded, and I'm aware of the ego behind this statement, but it's almost regarded as a Bible of the coffee shop industry over here. Yeah. But I felt then, hang on, let's just step back and think, have we got a process that we can really help cafe, coffee shops, restaurants, because we're sort of covering all three really, and of course, where's the line between cafe and coffee shop too? And that's when I wrote the second book. And that was about thinking, well, is there, now this is a horrendous title, because this is one of the issues with books is, and I'll come to more of this, but publishers, you argue with publishers over titles. And then this book ended up with this horrendous halfway house of a title that just sort of covers the whole page. Yeah. So it's the Coffee Boys step-by-step guide to setting up and managing your own coffee bar, how to open a coffee bar that actually lasts and makes money. It's nearly as long as the book. But it sort of works as a title, because if you can read long enough, you get to the end of it and think that might work. But that was me looking at process. What is the process of helping somebody to set up and run a profitable coffee shop? And we kind of 7 steps within that. And then that, sort of, certainly from my perspective, then suddenly you've got 2 books out there. And in terms of consulting and sort of everything, all the stuff that we do, there's a big jump in terms of credibility. But I think perhaps at least as importantly, it forces you to organize the thoughts in your head, forces you to create the process to go, right, okay, well, if I put my money where my mouth is, can I really help people to consistently make more money and run an easier business? And you write a book about that and you stick it on Amazon, or we've got to get it through a publisher, but then, and you stick it on Amazon. And if you haven't got a process, they let you know on Amazon fairly sharpish, and sometimes can be quite rude. So those 2 did really well and really helped me. And then when you start selling a lot of books, then the publisher goes, can we have another one? So what we decided to do for that one, this is a title made up by the publisher. And we didn't even get to approve it, which is why I will never traditionally publish a book again. This book has got nothing. It's not Wake Up and Sell More Coffee at all. It's not that at all. This is a book of 22 interviews with some of the best in the world, bunch of folk in the States, David Schomer in Seattle, that kind of stuff. Really good names and their perspective. And then me testing my formula based upon what they said. Okay. But that Wake Up and Sell More Coffee doesn't say any of that. So, I'm really proud of that book, but I feel it hasn't done as well because the title, there's a disconnect. You know what I mean? Yep.
Well, I think for me, I like the book. I love stories and I love hearing how other people got to where they are because, myself, we're in a building that we just bought. It's 9,000 square feet. And there's a 3,000 square foot lower level. It's going to be called America's Best Restaurants University. And the goal is every 2 weeks, starting in late July, to bring together 20 or 30 restaurateurs to talk business. Yep. And I think that's where you can read a book on, I got this book here on hacking growth. You can read books.
I know the book.
And all these things and come up with it. But when you hear an actual story about how this coffee shop did these 3 things, it makes you resonate more. And, if you read these 20-something stories and you come out of it with 4 or 5 ideas this year, and then reread it next year 4 or 5. So I think even though I see what you're saying, the title doesn't resonate with you, when I read the stories, it resonates with me because everything in those stories is going to help me if I was a coffee shop sell more coffee at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's human nature. We like stories.
Yep.
And I think that's why I've always tried to drop through in all of my books, all of the stories, including some pretty brutal stories where I've got it wrong, because we all do. Yep. And I think there's an awful lot to be said for not writing books where you go, hey, I'm so great, look at all of this stuff. Because even if you are great, what's much more resonant is I made this mistake, and that's why I'm really strongly saying to you, don't make this mistake, because you don't want to have it all and then you don't want to be standing effectively in the streets with your car repossessed and that's humiliating.
Yep.
When you're 29 and think you're about to become a millionaire next year, and then you have to there was a little pause pushed on that thing. So yeah, I mean, it's books are great. I love books. I've written books on a couple of other subjects too, but they as I say, I really love the way they help to organize your thoughts. And I'm kind of fascinated by I have about 3 on the go at any one time. Actually the one that I'm doing that has probably been sitting for about 8 or 9 years is effectively like a 1-minute manager type, parable or fable kind of book.
Okay.
And that will be about, as you know, in our industry, management training is generally very poor. Lots of people become managers, and this is bars, it's restaurants, it's cafes, nearly all hospitality, maybe not so much hotels, but people become managers just because they're really reliable and they turn up again and again and again. And then suddenly they get the keys and they get, okay, can you do the rota? Blah, blah, blah. But they haven't actually been trained. So that book will be a parable, sort of a fable about that. And then we're launching a home management training process, some face-to-face and some online as well during this year. But, as you say, there's that system that you're building there to get people together so that, they can talk face-to-face and go, A, on one side, which is the good bit, I tried this, it really worked. Why don't you try that? Yeah. Or B, I tried this, it really didn't work. Yeah. But just some nice honesty, face-to-face honesty, which is, I think, a lot of what we've been missing.
Yeah. Well, and your last comment about how managers kind of work their way up is ironic, because one of my first topics I wanted to ask about, so what I did was I bookmarked three spots in the book just to get a little more deeper understanding. And
right.
I was actually talking to an owner about 2 or 3 months ago on my podcast, MPTV, about a general manager that she had hired that flopped hard. And she said, it's funny, we look back and that general manager flopped because we didn't have anything in place to say, hey, this is what your job is. This is what happens when the doors open. It was like, hey, you've been reliable. You've shown up. You've worked your butt off. Hey, now you're in charge of everything. So on page 80, something that caught my attention was talking about, is there a training gap? Is there a system and process in place? And one thing that comes to my mind is there an SOP? Is there a standard operating procedure of how sales happens? And I'm guessing you've probably heard that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we do and that I've done a lot in the past is you realize that SOPs, checklists, a lot of the handbooks, manuals and so on, often they don't actually get read. They don't get followed. So half the battle is, yes, do you have one? But also then is it being followed? So we do a lot of video-based training to accompany what might be an SOP.
Okay.
So that you have, and I'm a big fan of multiple things. So for example, let's take something that you might want an SOP over, which just might even just be opening up the shop. Generally not, but something a little bit more sophisticated than that. And therefore, if you can put that onto a one-pager so that it's not in a big manual that sits getting dusty on a shelf, if you can then also produce 2 types of video, one of which is showing the perfect execution of that, which is actually a really boring video, but one of which shows a shambolic version of it, then it's really much easier to train the staff. Do you know what I mean? They buy into that and they think, of course, we've all seen that version of that. So you want to try, and then you have checklists to go alongside that. So you try and come in from different angles and then do role play and this, that, and the other so that it's gone properly in, rather than just, here's your SOP, now do it, or you'll lose your job or whatever. I mean, that's an extreme example, but you know what I mean? So I think actually getting people to do what you want requires quite a lot of really seeing it from their perspective, if you know what I mean, and really thinking, okay, well, most of the time in our industry, they're not being that well paid. It's hard to get them to really care. So first of all, which was the first part of the process in the second book, was you need this thing that you're passionate about. You need to get that passion across to potential employees. Now, I know that you have the same problem in the States that we have, which is a chronic shortage of staff, of labor. And that's only going to get worse because we've many, many more ways that have arisen through COVID for people to get food delivered to them or have meal kits or all of these things. That requires, more people working in the industry. Yeah. And really the amount that hasn't gone up, it's gone down because a lot of people have left the industry thinking, actually, do you know what? This industry is really hard work. It's long hours, it's weekends, it's late. Sometimes I have to deal with drunks.
Stressful.
It's really stressful. Yeah, you all of these lines that people use in terms whenever things aren't going well. We use all of these lines, some of which are swear-based, but murdered, slaughtered. That's what you know what I mean when you describe a service that's going, we were slaughtered last night. That's hardly an appealing way to get people to come to and work in an industry. So I think it's going to be a bit of a shift. And I think there has to be a bit of a shift. I think people in the States, you folk can create better careers for people. They can see it as a career better than sometimes happens here.
Okay.
But still, it's hard work.
Yeah, for sure. So talking about hard work, and this is something I've seen a lot myself the last couple of years. I had a banker in this morning. We were meeting about our business and some things in the future. And I said, what's something that's unique is I showed him our org chart of our company of 30 plus people. And I'm like, I'm nowhere down here. I don't actually do anything every day. Like I don't create, I don't do stuff. So for example, if I was a restaurant, I don't actually do anything in the business. I lead. I have, I'm a visionary. And, page 100 talks about that in the book where it talks about that you've got to have operational balance that, in some of these businesses, you're going to have to be in there making the coffee. You're going to be in there serving the people. Then you also got to work on the business. That if you ignore the business, it kind of stays stagnant. And that's what happened with my business was probably 4 years. In the middle of our before we started growing more and more, I was doing all the work.
Yeah.
By me doing all the work, I never got to look at the work we were doing deep enough.
Sure.
I'm guessing that happens a lot more in the restaurant, especially coffee business as well, because there's a lot of operators that are deeply involved in day-to-day operations.
Huge amount. And actually, I've been criticized for saying versions of that, slightly more extreme versions of that, because in the restaurant industry, there's a slightly different perspective than there is in particularly the specialty coffee side of business. And money and making profit is never a dirty word in the restaurant industry, or almost never. But sometimes it is a little bit within the specialty coffee industry. People want to, and I mean, it's all well-intentioned.
It's more of an art.
Yeah, it's all well-intentioned until they lose their house, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
So I've been criticized for saying that when I reached 30, I decided that I never wanted to work behind the counter again because I was building businesses as opposed to necessarily, standing there and making a cup of coffee or whatever, Now, that, I could get defensive as to why I was being criticized, but my point is I still went into all of my units and spoke to an enormous amount of customers. I did this stuff, I cleared tables. I was working on the business whilst I'm doing that. I'm talking to them. I'm saying, what did we do wrong here today? So there's an operational balance, but you cannot, I have no issue with people who stand behind the counter and work hard on it. But, particularly as you get older, you can't do 40, 50 hours and then come back in the evening and actually work on the business after a period of time.
You're tough.
Constructively.
Yeah. And that's one thing I've found, like with me, I've actually done this a lot of times is I'll go to our office here and I'll just go over to the side, a cup of coffee, sit there and watch.
Yeah.
And just observe.
Exactly.
I've gone to restaurants and done it. And it's just, what am I seeing? And I was at a coffee shop the other day. I won't say what I saw because it's not for TV, but in the bathroom, there was something I noticed a couple weeks ago in the men's room. And I went back this past week and there it was again. And I'm like, and it's like somebody missed that for 2 weeks. Yeah. And it's because people are working in the business versus on it and putting things in place to make sure that they cross their T's, dot their I's and all that good stuff.
I'll tell you one of almost the best the most effective 2 days that I ever had in my life. I used to spend a lot of time sitting in my own cafes or business and watching customers as they came through the door, watching the whole process. So I've been fascinated always by process. Now, I was working with a very, very successful client who sold up for tens of millions, and we spent 2 days with cameras on the sort of behind the counter so that you could see right through to the front door. So you see a customer coming through to the counter. Consider it like a standard sort of Starbucks type model. Through the counter, greeting, waiting, coffee being made, going to the seat. And we did 2 days of this start to finish video. Now, this was the most successful store that they had. And I watched it, and then we wanted to edit it back down into usable information for the for staff training. Now, I could have easily given that to somebody else to edit down, but I sat and watched it all again and edited it down myself. And when you really sit and dispassionately observe what's going on and read a customer's face and read all of these steps, you realize just how many variables are in place. So what we ended up with, or what I've ended up doing off the back of that, is looking at each stage of that and thinking there are dozens of variables that affect each stage of that customer journey. Yeah. And we kind of break it down into 7 steps, but one of them is we call the threshold, which is before they actually come through the door. And then the final step is the return, which is how you get them back. Social media, not loyalty card stamps, how you genuinely get them back, Well, loyalty card stamps is just discount, So that, what you're saying in terms of standing, sitting, whatever, watching, just patiently watching and removing your ego and watching a customer's face and thinking, we've got that wrong, So yeah, it's really, really important.
Yeah, it's huge. And it's helped me really grow our business. I had a banker recently asked how our business has grown so much the past 3 years. And honestly, it was because I got out of the mix of every day and I was able to watch it and give my team better explanations and teach them and help them develop better strategies. So that leads me to my last point. So page 138 talked about never stop learning. And I think a lot of times restaurateurs, coffee shop owners, business owners, whatever, we get to a certain point of our 20s or 30s. Like I've got friends of mine, I didn't read hardly at all in my 20s. I now read pretty much every day. I mean, I've got this bookcase behind me. Those are all drop books.
Well, I can imagine you have a good bookcase.
So let's talk about the cafeexpert.com/masterclass. What are you helping entrepreneurs learn in there?
Well, what we, obviously a lot of this stuff has changed. Actually, that link goes up when I'm thinking, I'm trying to remember exactly what we, because it changes every week, So I've got to go scuttle away after this and go and make sure we've got exactly what the current thing is. The point is, what we're trying to do is, I've done some research, I've got quite a large email list and we're building a lot of the social media as I know you are too. And we ask people specifically what they want. And what people want, or the thing that they vote for most, is a profit producing system. A business that can make money whether they are there or not. Yeah. And now what we've done is we've rejigged all of our training just in the last month or so, basically around the provision of a model, as it were, that they can that can be applied to their business, taking into account the uniqueness that they have, their customers, their model, whatever, and build it through menu, merchandising, people, and promote. Menu, merchandising, people. You work the menu, you work the way that you're merchandising. When I say merchandising, I mean all signage within the shop or restaurant. The people, well, look, it's, people that, but it's get them on board, and it's more important than ever. And then the promotional thing has so many different aspects, as you very well know, so many different aspects. It's certainly not just, it's not advertising, it's not social media, it's not, it's not signage, it's so many different things. So that's what we focus on, because those are what I call the levers to pull. You pull those levers of those 4 things and you increase sales, you increase average transaction value, you get people to come back more often, you get new customers, and you get more to the bottom line. You get your 5% net profit up to 15 to 20. But it's a methodical process, as you very well know, as I say. So that's effectively at that link, which we'll make sure we've got, is the most current version of that piece of free training. And then, of course, people can go, well, yes, great. I'd like to see some more of what that fella talks about with his slightly strange Northern Irish accent, or or I'll take that and go and apply it. But I'll watch his next thing. I'll watch his you know the game.
Yeah.
Because we're just trying to give value, and then eventually people go, right, okay, yes, I trust you to sort of help me out, or come and arrive at your, I have no doubt, very expensive facilities that the bankers are going, right, go get some money in.
Well, awesome. Well, I appreciate your time. I love the content you put out. I especially like the stories in here, and I look forward to reading the other books. I'm going backwards. I'm going book 3 to 2 to 1.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting, and that's an interesting journey. But look, thank you very much for having me on. We will no doubt catch up at some stage in various ways, and I wish you the very best with that new facility. And at some stage, I'd love to have a look. But let's just get out of COVID first, eh?
Yeah. One step at a time, and then in the near future, we'll get you across the pond, and we'll have you here, and we'll get to meet in person.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it.
Thanks, John.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.